Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Wokingham Borough Council's Executive. My name's Stephen Conway. I'm the leader of the Council and Executive Member for Affordable Housing and Partnerships, and I'll be chairing the meeting. Just a few housekeeping points to begin with. Could you ensure that any mobile devices, mobile phones are switched off? If you are participating via Teams when you are not speaking, please mute your microphones. And please also note that the meeting is currently being webcast live. I want to try and introduce you to the people in the room. We've got online joining us Gary Cowan, who's a councillor, Councillor for Arborfield, who I think is going to be asking a question in a few minutes. There's Matt Pope, who is the Executive Director for Children's, Adults and Health. Sally Watkin, who is the Chief Operating Officer. Dave Allen, who is Head of Council Communications. There are two other figures there who are both actually in the room, so I'm going to introduce them in the room. We've had Liam Olaf and Priya Patel from the Council's Democratic Services. We have the Chief Executive, Susan Parsonage. And next to Susan is Andrew Moulton, who's the Council's Monitoring Officer and Assistant Director for Governance. And Graham Ebers, who's the Chief Finance Officer and Deputy Chief Executive. I haven't missed anybody out, have I? I don't think so. Now we turn to the councillors, and I'm going to, as I do ordinarily, ask them to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start this month with Paul on this side.
Good evening. My name is Paul Fishwick. I'm the Executive Member for Active Travel, Transport and Highways.
Good evening, Ian Shenton, Executive Member for Environment, Sport and Leisure.
Good evening. My name is Lindsay Ferris. I'm the Executive Member for Planning and the Local Plan.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Prue Bray. I'm the Lead Member for Children's Services and Deputy Leader of the Council.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Imogen Shepherd-Bay. I am the Executive Member for Finance.
Good evening, everybody. I'm David Cornish, Business and Economic Development.
And just before we move on to Rachel, a welcome to David. This is his first meeting of the Executive. He's newly joined the Executive. So a very warm welcome to you, David. And we're very pleased to have you with us.
Super. Good evening. My name's Rachel Bishop-Firth. I'm the Executive Member for Equalities, Inclusion and Fighting Poverty.
Good evening. My name is David Hare. I'm Executive Member for Adult Services, Health and Wellbeing.
Right, that's everybody, I think. I don't think there are any apologies for absence because we have a full house. So we can move on to item 79, which is minutes of the previous meeting. I just want to draw your attention to a small correction that's needed in the minutes. At the top of page 16, mysterious Andrew question mark is Andrew Hinchcliffe. So with that amendment, with Andrew being given his full name, is everybody content that the minutes can be approved subject to that addition? Yes. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Right, we move to declarations of interests, and I think you have to explain what the nature of your interest is and which agenda item it relates to. And I can start off with a declaration of interest in relation to item 88. That's the shareholders' shareholders' mid-year report, 2023-24. My declaration of interest is as the chair and non-executive director of Loddon Homes and Wokingham Borough Council Holdings. I think there are some other colleagues who will have to similarly declare an interest. And although we have no pecuniary interest in this, I think we will all of us who are declaring an interest in relation to that item on the agenda, will not be either speaking in the discussion of it, if there is a discussion of it. I will introduce it and then hand over to Imogen to lead on it. And we will not be voting either. It's not proper. We should do that. So, Prue.
Thank you, Stephen. I am also a non-executive director of WBC Holdings, and I'm chair of Berrybrook Homes and Woking Housing Limited. And it's the same item 88. And I will be observing what Stephen said, not speaking and not voting.
David.
Thank you, Stephen. Again, it's for item 88. I declare an interest as a non-executive director of Loddon Homes Limited and WBC Holdings Limited, and I also will not be voting.
Thank you, David. Now, David, you're going to just add a slight variation to this.
I declare an interest in item 88, but I'm a director of Optal, a non-executive director of Optalis, and again, I won't be speaking or voting.
Right, thank you, David. Okay, so that's clear, I think. We now move on to statement from the Leader of Council. I just have a brief statement to make. The Council has been lobbying government for a fairer funding formula, which recognises the true costs of providing adult and children's social care. The borough's residents clearly share our view that the council needs a fairer deal from government. Over 1,000 of them wrote to the Secretary of State to point out how the current funding formula disadvantages Wokingham. The local government minister wrote to me before Christmas acknowledging our arguments and those of the 1,000+ residents who wrote in support of our case. I want to take this opportunity to thank again those residents who took the time and trouble to write. It looks as though their and our efforts have been rewarded. Yesterday, we learned that the government is going to make additional payments to councils that face the challenge of meeting the rising costs of providing adult and children's social care. We do not anticipate that we will receive a significant amount of additional support. Sadly, Wokingham never does seem to. And it will certainly not remove the need to make savings to meet inflation and growth pressures amounting to some 17.3 million in this coming year. But it will help. We believe that our residents' letters played a part in securing this outcome, and I'm very grateful for the support they've given for their council. Thank you. Right, we now move on to item 82, that's public question time. And our first question is from Colin Watts. Good evening, Colin. Very good to see you again. If you'd like to read out your question.
Good evening. In Michael Gove's speech to the REBA conference on 19th December 2023, he presented the updated National Planning Policy Framework. Whilst the updated NPPF confirms that the standard method of calculating housing need remains in place, he went to great lengths to make clear that, and I quote, local authorities have the comfort of knowing that they need not redraw the green belt or sacrifice protected landscapes to meet housing numbers. Therefore, will you confirm that you will take advantage of the updated NPPF and produce an updated LPU with a significantly lower number of houses compared to the November 2021 version, reflecting that the standard method of calculating housing need has to be adjusted in order to provide greater protection for the green fields in Wokingham Borough?
Thank you, Colin. And your question is directed to Lindsay, so I'll ask him to answer.
Thank you, Colin, for your question. As you refer, the government published an updated National Planning Policy Framework known as the NPPF in December. Reviewing the NPPF itself and not a speech, little has changed. As before, the government will tell councils how many houses should be built through an unchanged algorithm. As before, departure from this algorithm is permitted only in exceptional circumstances, and those circumstances are so rare that the algorithm will apply in almost all cases. As before, Local plans are expected to meet the housing needs defined by the algorithm unless the NPPF itself provides a strong reason not to, or the adverse impacts would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the NPPF, which includes the objective of significantly boosting the supply of homes. The perfectly reasonable proposal from the government to allow homes built in excess of a council's requirement to be deducted from future needs has been removed. It is not in the current NPPF. This means we cannot take account of the near additional 2,000 homes that have been delivered over and above our requirement since 2006. We will continue to make representations to ministers about the unsatisfactory state of national policy, but at the same time, we will have to move forward to the final stage of the local plan process to ensure our policies remain effective. Let me be clear. Contrary to the message conveyed by the government, the new NPPF requires house building at a scale which meets their unchanged algorithm. Meeting our development needs will be challenging. However, through the local plan, we intend to take the opportunity to deliver the highest quality development for our residents. Of the homes we plan for our aim, homes we plan for our aim remains to deliver a greater number of affordable homes than in the past, subject to viability. We are also working on new policies which will secure more energy efficient homes, improve the safeguarding of our valued landscapes, and identify important local green spaces to be protected from inappropriate development. It is important, therefore, that we progress our local plan to include both the right strategy and the right policies for the future.
Thank you, Lindsay. Colin, I'm sure you've got a supplementary.
Just to say, I share your disappointment that the revised NPPF wasn't clearer and in fact wasn't as profiled in advance. But my supplementary is that in the January the 4th edition of Wokingham Today, Pauline Jorgensen, the leader of the Wokingham Conservatives on the council, said that if her party regained control of the council in May, it would deliver a local plan that, amongst other things, would protect our green spaces. John Redwood recently stated that, and I quote, "I've worked with a group of MPs to secure the promise from the government that they will not impose mandatory top-down targets for numbers of homes to be built. More power will rest with local councils to design a suitable local plan. Therefore, is it now the time to take the LPU out of local politics and work with Pauline and other Conservatives to produce a cross-party agreed LPU with a significantly lower number of houses compared to the November 2021 version?"
I think John Redwood MP must have not listened to his colleagues when he was spoken to, because there is absolutely nothing in the NPPF, as you've just indicated, to show that there would be lower numbers. And the only thing that in there is about exceptional circumstances. The very first words does say about some changes, but after that, there's nothing. So I think that either he wasn't looking or concentrating enough on the information from his colleagues. So I'm afraid that I dismiss John Redwood's comments. On the issue from Pauline Jorgensen, we have a cross-party working group, as was done in the 21 local plan update, which obviously the Conservative members are invited. And we have held a number of those meetings. Their attendance has been relatively low, but they've always had at least one person present at them. And we have been discussing a whole number of issues, including energy, local green spaces, which was the last meeting we had, and the previous one was about landscape views. And there are a few benefits in the NPPF, which help in the neighbourhood plan area, particularly those parishes who can include some housing numbers in their network, in their neighbourhood plan, so that they can be protected for 5 years instead of 2. So there are little bits, and also the 5% buffer, which is a figure that's also added to the housing number, has been removed because we've always made that. But the biggest disappointment, as I mentioned, was the removal of this issue, which was in the draft proposals for the NPPF, to allow for over provision in one local plan into the next local plan. And in the case of Wokingham Borough, our number of houses that we have built in excess of what we had needed to is just under 2,000 homes. And because the government has not allowed for that in the current version of the NPPF, we cannot take those 2,000 houses out of the equation.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Colin. Andy, it's your time to ask your question. It's Andy Bailey. Good evening, Andy, and good to see you again.
Good evening. Nice to see you all. My question kind of aligns with a little bit of what you were saying, Lindsay, and it relates to landscape value. So could the current land classification of Hall Farm site be clarified, please? Is it countryside, and is it designated an area of landscape value? And what protections does this afford?
I'll preface my answer with, I have to be careful about talking about specific sites in the local plan, but I'm trying to answer your question here. The land which forms part of the Loddon Valley or Hall Farm opportunity is situated within the countryside under the adopted core strategy local plan, which looked to guide development into the period to 2026. In this plan, new housing was directed to new strategic development areas, North and South Wokingham, Shinfield and Arborfield Garrison. As you may be aware, the land around Hall Farm has been promoted by the landowners for the creation of a new garden village. The next local plan will put into place a strategy for managing development till 2040. The creation of a new garden village at Hall Farm was part of the preferred strategy consulted on in 2021. I must be clear that the next local plan will need to enable new land to come forward to meet development needs in line with government policy. Alongside this, we are also working on new policies which will ensure more affordable housing, improve energy efficiency of homes, and identify landscapes and local green spaces. What I can say is that we have identified 13 such valued landscapes in the borough, and they will come available and knowledge when it gets more. But we have found that a very useful and innovative way of, I believe, protecting areas for the future.
Thank you, Lindsay.
I'm sure you have a supplementary.
I do indeed. Thank you, Lindsay, for that. I wonder if you could perhaps explain the criteria that is used to designate an area of landscape value. So how does an area become classified as being of landscape value?
It's quite a technical answer. So what I will do is I'll give you a written one because I don't want to give you a partially correct answer. But what I will say is the officers have gone around the borough. They've looked at the areas that have the most significant vistas and the views as an area, and they have put them forward for us to be able to discuss. And we did have one meeting of the local plan working group where these sites were looked at and discussed.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. If that's to be repeated, you're very welcome to come and look from my first floor at the vista we currently have.
I wish.
Over part of the Hall Farm site, but there you go. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. I think one part of the criteria, which I think I can say, is it's got to be viewable from a public place as opposed to your bedroom windows. Okay,
have to let people in.
yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. And we now move on to member question time, and we have just one member question, I believe, and that's from Gary. And I know Gary's with us online. Good evening, Gary. Good to see you. Would you like to ask your question, Gary?
Yeah. Can I ask the question standing in my name, please?
Yes, indeed. And it's Lindsay to answer.
Good evening, Gary. I would like to acknowledge that Councillor Gary Cowan left the Conservative group to become an independent councillor during November 2016. However, I have a copy of the adopted course strategy for Wokingham Borough, dated January 2010, signed by Councillor Gary Cowan. This, of course, is the current local plan. At that time, Councillor Gowan was happy to put houses in North Wokingham, South Wokingham, Barkham, Harbourfield Green, Chapstead, Wokingham Without, Shinfield, Winnish, and other parts north, east, south and west of the borough. So many dwellings, in fact, that between 2011 and 2021, the population of Wokingham Borough grew by over 15%, the third highest in the country. So if anyone owes the residents of this borough an apology, it is Councillor Cowan.
Thank you, Lindsay. Gary, do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be perfectly honest, I'm quite happy to apologise for that comment made by Lindsay, unlike the leader of the Lib Dems when asked to apologise over the post offices 3 times by the ITV. He refused 3 times to do it. Anyway, getting back to my supplementary question, you did say at the last executive, if we take the current local plan running to 2026, there are a number of developments that may not be completed before that. And you correctly added that one cannot be sure that developments will be completed in the 15-year plus local plan period. When a plan reaches its end date, houses not completed are just added to the new government housing targets, which I understand to be now 795 houses a year. There is no government requirement, and I'll emphasise no government requirement, to add 2,300 extra houses over and above the targets set by government of 795 houses a year. My question is, will the new plan have an appendix like the current Appendix 6, which gives a scheduled programme for building the actual housing numbers dictated by government over the plan period, which I think worked out was 11,925. So how will the new local plan update show the extra 2,003 houses that are not part of the government's target, but are in your plan to be built, will be shown in the new local housing plan? Thank you.
We will be only providing the homes that we are obliged to provide. If we can get the government to change their minds about the over-provision issue that we spoke about within the lack of it within the NPPF, we would be able to remove 2,000 homes from a local plan update. So the number that's referred would be less. I am not adding anything to the numbers that are imposed. If the government goes ahead, then the number we have to provide is higher than if the NPPF had included allowance for that reduction. And that is where we are at. You are quite correct just now, as I mentioned, that not all properties can be built within the period, and in particular the South Wokingham one, in fact, hasn't even started. So when you start a local plan, as we are here in now 2024, and one that goes through to 2040, we do not know how the economy will run, how the development will take place, what will happen as to the number of houses. The view that I've taken is that I think it is more honest to say that if there is a development that could very well go over the 15-year period, that it is best to say that there would be X that would be likely to go over the period of 15 years, and that the number included within the 15-year period is the number that's allocated to the local plan. And that is how I've been looking at things, and that is where I have come from.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Gary. Okay, we move now on to item 84 in the agenda. That's unreasonably persistent complaints policy. And I believe Prue is going to introduce this.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. So this is a policy that was primarily overseen by Sarah when she was in her executive role, although I had some input into it. So now I think technically it's in your portfolio now, but as you had no involvement with it, I'll deal with it as somebody who did. So I think the most important thing to point out is this is not a new policy. Okay, this is updates to an existing policy, and you can see what the updates are at the bottom of page 20 in the agenda. So first of all, the language has been made clearer, and then there's a reference to the 3 C's, and I know that regularly mystifies people, so I'm just going to tell you what they are. The 3 C's are the 3 principles for communicating with our residents and with people generally. They stand for care, which means we show empathy to people; clarity, making things easier to understand, which is the one I think that mostly applies to this policy change; and confidence, which is about being accurate and transparent so that people can trust us. So those are the 3 C's, and I hope you'll remember that forevermore. I doubt it somehow, however. Second, we're no longer just going to keep a list of vexatious complainants. We will keep records to show the process by which they were declared to be vexatious. And we've also put more safeguards into the process so that a director and the corporate leadership team have to agree that somebody should be declared vexatious, not just the service making up their mind. And there's going to be a flow chart to help people understand what the process is. So you'll notice that none of those things changes the reasons why somebody could be deemed to be a vexatious complainant, nor does it change what happens to them when they are. So that's just staying as it is. What I would say is this process is rarely used, and it's very much a last resort for dealing with people who want to pursue complaints in a way which is completely unreasonable. But such people do exist, and we do have to have a process for handling those situations. So to say, it's not a new policy, it's just an attempt to make it more transparent and to put a few extra safeguards in.
Thank you, Prue. So in effect, this is increasing the threshold for judging somebody to be in breach of this policy, because it requires now CLT approval. This is the corporate leadership team as a whole.
Higher, yes, the very senior leadership at the council will have to deem that somebody is vexatious before they will be put online.
So rather than being the decision of a single service head, it becomes a collective decision, which obviously means there's more opportunity to question. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you for that introduction. Are there any questions or observations, or can we go to a vote on the recommendation on page 19, which is to approve the updated unreasonably persistent complainants policy, which is in your agenda as Appendix 2. So those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Right, we now move on to the next item on our agenda. It's item 84, which is the first of
85.
Sorry, 85, which is the first of several reports that are going to be presented by Imogen. So Imogen, this one is revenue monitoring 2023-24 Q3. So over to you.
Okay, yeah, I apologise in advance. Here we go. The revenue monitoring report. This report shows our revenue spend for Q3, October to December 2023. Inflation has continued to be a problem, with the spending pressures outstripping the predictions, along with the increased demand for our services. That extra demand has been in excess of 11 million this year, but with actions that have been taken throughout the year, we're now looking at only a 3.6 million overspend that will probably change before year end. The graph on page 32, I think it is page 32 in your copy, shows the council's position against the retail price index and illustrates the problems quite well. The problem financing council services is certainly not unique to Wokingham Borough Council, and a number of local authorities have not been able to produce a balanced budget as a result, causing to issue a Section 114 notice. Just to be clear, I do not expect that to be Wokingham Borough Council at this point in time, but it's fair to say that most councils are showing an unprecedented level of financial distress, particularly if they are supporting adult and children's services. As you can see, the area with the biggest overspend is children's services, and this is mainly due to home to school transport and placements for children with complex needs and support for care leavers. I will let Prue talk about what is going on in children's services and what they're doing to manage their problems. There is a 0.43 million overspend in adult services. This is due to the increases in market rates for care and the increase in demand for services. There is a 0.56 million overspend in place of growth. The housing revenue account, which is ring-fenced for our social housing, will have a small overspend of £12,000, largely due to the increase in maintenance costs. In other good news, the Chief Executive's Office, which includes democratic services, HR, customer service, communications, IT, have been able to reduce their expected costs by £106,000 by reducing contractors and holding vacancies open. While I'm not comfortable with the overspend, I'm comfortable that we are doing everything we can to manage it. We're just required to note this report.
Thank you, Imogen. I think you gave through a bit of a prompt to speak, so she's going.
Yes, thank you. As Imogen said, all authorities with children's services are seeing the same sorts of pressures as we are. It's the home to school transport, special educational needs, and children's social care placements. So a lot of work has been done to make savings, but the demand is increasing and the costs are increasing, and they are both going up more rapidly than we can make savings. Should add, the approach we're taking towards finding savings is aimed at transforming services to deliver them differently and not at salami slicing the ones that we currently have, because we need the services to be sustainable for the longer term. We're also working very hard to drive improvement for the sake of the children who need our services, but it's, I think it's true to say, absolutely no doubt, it's a very challenging environment to work in at the moment. I did want to talk about one other thing, which is on page 45, and that's the dedicated schools grant. It's laid out on page 45. And particularly, I would draw your attention to the high needs block. So I think you all know about the Safety Valve programme, but for the benefit of members of the public watching, this is the agreement we have with the Department for Education to bring our special educational needs spending in line with our resources over a 6-year period, in return for which they will write off half our accumulated deficit. When I say our, that's Wokingham's education system deficit. But if we don't write it off, it all falls on the council, even though it's not all of our spending. We've had this safety valve agreement in place for almost a year, and things are going okay at the moment as far as we know, but it's very hard work keeping things on track. The deficit, which you can see illustrated there, is roughly in line with our predictions at the beginning of the year. And you can see that in the comments against that block. The thing I think is important to say is that Safety Valve is not just about the money. It is a financial agreement, but it's predicated on improving our SEND services. And there are 16 work streams sitting behind it. And those work streams are aimed at catching children at the point at which people first notice they have an additional need and trying to provide them with help immediately. That's not just better for the child, but it's cheaper to deliver that help, because in many cases the need is addressed earlier before it becomes really expensive and doesn't escalate. So what's happened is a bit of a pattern of traditionally parents and schools have turned to trying to get assessments for education, health and care plans almost as a first resort, because they couldn't see that there was anything else available that would lever in some help for their child. And what we're trying to do is provide the effective early interventions to prevent that happening. It's a really important change that it's it's just starting now. We've got somebody employed to work with schools. We've got some outreach stuff coming. We are really we're getting everything in place. It takes a long time, and it will eventually not just be reflected in better outcomes for children, we hope, but also in the spending that will be laid out in future revenue monitoring reports. But unfortunately, it's not affecting the deficit just yet.
Okay, just leaving aside the DSG, just going back to the general situation, I just want to really emphasise the point you made, Rue, which is the approach we're trying to adopt is not going down the route of salami slicing, but really trying to think quite radically about how we can save money in the long term, not just the quick fixes. And this is really about preventative work, early intervention work, and critically investing to save. And it's quite these require bold decisions to be made. And I really want to commend Imogen and all of the executive members for the work they're doing to control these budgets. This is the Q3 revenue monitoring. We clearly have got deficits to still tackle, in-year deficits to tackle, but I am confident that we're working hard to ensure we do so. And I also want to thank Graham Evers, our Chief Finance Officer, and all of the council staff for the work they're putting in to try and control our spending, but also to try and get us to the point where we can produce at year end a healthy picture. So thank you everyone for all the work you're doing. We've still got more to do, but I don't think there's anything more we need to say on revenue revenue monitoring, Q3. So unless there are any points anyone wants to make, I suggest we go to a vote on the recommendation on page 31 that we note the overall forecast of the current position. Okay, those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. Excellent. And we might now move on to the next of Imogen's battery of reports. This is on page 47, item 86, capital monitoring.
Okay.
Imogen, over to you.
Sure, thank you. Okay, again, this report shows our capital position this time over Q3, essentially October to December 2023. We have several recommendations in this report, including some items that will be carried forward. There has been an additional 8.9 million added to the Gorse Ride redevelopment to cover the increasing costs of the remaining lifetime of the project. This will use S106 commuted sums from property developments locally to cover the costs of building new social and affordable housing. We need to approve an additional 2.9 million for the year 2023 to 24 for secondary school expansion, and this will be funded from the Department of Education grants. This needs to be accelerated so we have enough places for our children in the forthcoming school year. We also need to approve 250,000 for disabled adaptations, which is funded from the Housing Revenue Account non-RTB reserve. And lastly, we need to approve a budget of £93,862,000 for disabled facilities, which is a ring-fence grant that's been awarded to Woking Borough Council this year. We've managed to save 27.8 million across the capital programme this year by reassessing our spending needs. This includes realigning the deployment of electric charging points just to match the available grant, releasing budgets that were held to mitigate project risks and other scheme efficiencies. Does anyone have anything else they want to speak about before going through the recommendations?
I think you've explained things very well, Imogen. Are there any questions or observations?
Only to thank officers for the huge amount of work.
I was going to say the achievement of those £27 million of effective savings is a collective corporate one, and everyone who's played their part deserves our thanks. And that includes executive members and officers. So thank you very much, everyone. Okay, there are no questions or observations. We go to the vote on that. Those in favour? Thank you very much. I think you explained them sufficiently. I think we can see where they are. You don't need to vote twice on it though. Okay, so that's item 86 out of the way. We move on to item 87, starting on page 59. This is the Chief Finance Officer's report, which you might be forgiven for thinking the Chief Finance Officer might speak to, but he's not going to, apparently. It's going to be presented by Imogen, as she's the responsible executive member.
Yeah, I apologise to Graham. Okay, this is a statutory report from our Chief Financial Officer, Graham Evers, that has to be presented annually to councillors when setting our budget. We are required to note the report and support the attached letter that was sent to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government regarding our local government finance settlement. Our Chief Financial Officer, Graham Evers, highlights the problems of only getting the local government finance settlement grant on an annual basis, which makes it difficult for us to plan ahead. It also shows that the 65% of our budget is spent on adult social care and children's services, leaving only 45% of it for everything else, including highways, waste management, parks, libraries, etc., etc. In terms of government funding, we are the lowest in Berkshire and the lowest across the country per head of population. So we are highly dependent on council tax, which is capped at the annual increase of 4.99%. This grant calculation is based on our low levels of deprivation, which is a poor indicator as it does not reflect our actual needs. The affluence level of our residents is irrelevant when we still have children to get to school, or elderly people or vulnerable adults with disabilities to look after in an area with a high cost of living. The only way in which we are able to manage these rising costs is by regular financial rule reviews, to reduce the expenditure and to seek opportunities to maximise savings and incomes. It is also important to say that we have been lobbying central government for better funding, and we have invited the public to do the same. An example of a recent letter that we sent to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government is attached as part of this report, and it points out the significant disparity between Wokingham and the highest funded authority using per head of population. It particularly highlights the pressures of inflation, the national living wage, and the cost of living pressures and accommodating refugees. Graham outlines in his report that what each area of the council is doing, includes that it's going to be an extremely challenging time to keep spending within budget, given the national and local context, and we must do all we can to prevent any underfunded financial burdens flowing into the year 25-26. In the current economic landscape, Wokingham is not alone, and all councils are feeling the pressure, especially if they look after adult social care and children.
Thank you, Imogen. You wanted to say something?
Yes, sorry, I wanted to talk about the DSG again. It's on page 88. There's a section on the DSG. And on page 88, there's a table showing the increases in DSG for next year. DSG is a dedicated schools grant. It's split into the 4 blocks: the schools block, which is the one that goes to primary and secondary schools, the high needs block, which is for special educational needs spending, the early years block, which is for preschool age provision, and the central school services block, which is the bit we see as a council to help us with the cost of delivering our services that support schools and education. And you can see in that table, they're not all going up by the same percentage. So if we take the first block, the schools block, the table says schools will see an increase of 5.8%. Now that's not actually a blanket figure, because every school is not going to get the same. It's complicated because the majority of funding for schools is worked out on a per pupil basis. So they get an amount per pupil. And some schools will have more pupils this year than last year, and some will have less than last year. So not all schools will get the same increase. But as a guide, 5.8% is roughly right overall. I am aware of a claim that's being made online by the Leader of the Opposition that says that mainstream schools are getting an increase, and I'm going to be very careful and quote this absolutely accurately, exactly what she said. The mainstream schools are getting an increase of over 10% this year on last. That claim is not borne out by the figures. Why are they making a claim that isn't correct? I think the most charitable explanation that we've been able to come up with is they've simply made a mistake. It looks like what might have happened is that when they calculated the base for the previous year, they accidentally forgot to include 5.6 million in basic needs capital. And leaving that out means the base is too low. And then when they do the calculation for the percentage increase, it's come out too high. And whether that's the explanation for the figures or not, it is unequivocally the case that schools are not getting 10% more this year. They're getting roughly 6%. I'm not going to talk about the high needs block because I talked about that under the revenue monitoring, but I do need to explain the funding for the early years block. So they are getting 58.3% more, which on the face of it looks absolutely amazing. But in fact, that increase is to pay for changes to entitlement to childcare support. So from April 2024, eligible working parents of 2-year-olds will be able to access 15 hours of childcare support. That's the free childcare at a nursery or whatever a week. And in the autumn, that will be extended to working parents with children from the age of 9 months. That's a huge change in the entitlement, but as this is a finance report, so I'm not going to go into all the changes, but that is why there's such a large increase in the figures. It's to pay for the extra provision. And the last bit is the central school services block. That's the money that comes to the council for us to provide our education services. And we are getting a whole £42,000 more. And we will try very hard not to spend it all at once. So I'm going to sort of summarise that. The dedicated schools grant is going up. A lot of the increase is to pay for changes in early years. Schools are getting an increase, but not the percentage rise that the Conservatives have claimed. And the special educational needs budget is still going to be running a deficit next year, a sizable deficit. Now, as its name suggests, the dedicated schools grant is dedicated to schools and other providers. So the council's share of this money is pretty measly for all the things that we're expected to do. And we remain, as you can see on page 89, the 3rd worst funded education system in England. And if you want to know any more at all about the DSG budget after all that lot, there's a whole lot more information in the agenda for the last schools forum meeting, which was on the 10th of January, which is online somewhere, which has much more detail. But I think it is important to explain those numbers because they look a bit odd, some of them. Thank you.
I think that was very helpful, Prue. It's also very helpful just to be reminded that the council retains a very, very small portion of the money allocated to the schools. The schools receive most of it, and the council receives a small amount for administrative purposes and to carry out its statutory functions and duties. But that is a very tiny proportion.
Less than 1%.
Indeed. Okay, so we're asked to note we're asked to do 2 things here, I think, aren't we? Or is it just one? Page 59. No, we've done 59, sorry.
Response to the...
Yes, it's noted and support the response to the department's government.
That's right. So we're going to note the Chief Finance Officer's report, which is Appendix A, and we are going to support, I hope, the Council's response to the local government finance settlement as set out in Appendix 6, which is the letter that I think you and I and Graham have signed. So those in favour of the recommendations, please show. Lovely, that's carried unanimously. And now we move to item 88, the shareholders' midterm report. This is on page 95 of your agenda, and this is the item where I'm going to ask Imogen to handle this, and neither of the Davids, nor Prue, nor I will participate or vote on this item. So if you can lead on it, Imogen.
Okay, yeah, it's my last one, by the way. This report is an important part of the transparency requirements that shows the financial performance of our council-owned companies. We have 3 housing companies, Wokingham Housing Limited, Loddon Homes and Berrybrook Homes Limited. Optalis is the council's adult care services provider. There is currently a full review of the housing companies, and Councillor Stephen Conway covered this in his report to the Community and Corporate Overview and Scrutiny meeting on Monday. If agreed, it will provide a better and more financially sustainable and efficient position and a better governance of these housing companies. Since Wokingham Borough Council bought the Berkshire Care Home, Optalis has been working with Wokingham Borough Council to refurbish it and prepare it to service the needs of our Wokingham Borough Council residents. Optalis is not immune to national workforce issues that have been affecting the care industry, and it has meant that it has used more agency staff to keep things safe. But in the long run, the new care home will help us reduce our care costs. For those who are not directors of these companies, we just need to note the budget for the housing companies and Optalis. Has anyone got any questions? No. Okay, should we just note it? Thank you.
I think that was carried unanimously amongst those who were able to vote. So thank you. We now move on to item 89 on our agenda, air quality management areas. This is on page 101. And this is for Ian to present.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Air quality management areas are designated areas determined by the presence of nitrogen dioxide in excess of a government-determined limit of 40 micrograms per cubic metre. And I apologise, this is a slightly technical paper, but and that's a historical thing. You are required by law to monitor, and when the monitor shows that you are exceeding that, you have to declare an air quality management area. But there is a period of time determined by DEFRA, after which, if you have not had any exceedances, you have to revoke that designation. Now, we have 3 air quality management areas in Wokingham Borough. We have Wokingham Town Centre, Twyford Crossroads, and alongside the M4, particularly around where it crosses the 329 in Winnersh, but from the Reading border right up to the Windsor and Maidenhead border. Our last annual status report was submitted to DEFRA in June of last year, covering 2022, and their commentary on that was that basically 2 of those areas should no longer remain with the designation of air quality management areas, and that should be revoked. Those 2 areas to be revoked would be Twyford Crossroads and the M4. The Wokingham Town Centre will, for the time being, remain a designated AQMA. The monitoring takes place both continuously at Twyford Crossroads and in Wokingham Town Centre, plus periodically in all 3 of the AQMAs. And it will mean that the continuous monitoring in Twyford Crossroads will be terminated. I think that more or less summarises it, except to say that DEFRA have indicated in their commentary on our annual status report that they expect to see 2 areas revoked by the time we submit our next annual status report, which will be in the summer of this year and will refer to 2023 calendar year. And we could say, okay, well, maybe we're not going to do that. But DEFRA actually have the power to overrule us and compel us to revoke those areas. It also should be said that our air quality monitoring is in tandem with the Public Protection Partnership, and therefore West Berkshire and Bracknell are covered by the same thing, and both of those authorities are also revoking AQMAs following the 2023 ASRs. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much, Ian. Lindsay's got a question. We have two Twyford councillors on the executive, so you're almost bound to get a question on
yes,
Twyford Crossroads.
I almost have to give a declaration of interest because my house is on the Waltham Road, although not at the crossroads in Twyford. I'm going to make some comments before I ask my question. The figures that you're referring to are at 2022. The figures that DEFRA have referred to. My observation is that the traffic in Twyford now in late 23 and now into 2024 is now at what I would call pre-pandemic levels. It was not in 2022. The difference that's happened is busy hours changed, and it isn't quite so dramatic at 8 to 9 o'clock in the morning, although I have had a number of queues recently, which we didn't have for quite a long time. So I have got some concerns that we may be using figures by DEFRA at a time when the level of traffic that was travelling through Twyford was lower than it is currently now. I will qualify it by saying that I would estimate that about 1 in 6 vehicles going through are now electric. That's a small sample of counting them as they were going through, just to assess. So there are an increased number of electric vehicles, which would reduce. So my question is, if they have to, if they've asked us to revoke the continuous monitoring, will there be any monitoring at all at the Twyford crossroads, so that if the levels have increased, we would be able to identify that?
The short answer is yes. The periodic monitoring will continue, and it will also continue alongside the M4, particularly around the Winnersh crossroads area. If there were any further exceedances, then clearly we could push for the redesignation of the areas, and would happily do so. The penetration of electric vehicles is increasing, and I think there was in the report there is a projection of the growth of electric vehicles, and there is some I suppose expectation that will continue to improve the air quality, because the nitrogen dioxide is a byproduct of the internal combustion engine, and clearly when you don't have one, you don't get NO2 in such quantities. But yes, the continuous monitoring will be removed, but there are several sites within Twyford, within the boundary defined within the maps, that will be subject to periodic monitoring.
I'm not sure you're allowed supplementaries, but I'll let you.
What is the duration of the gap between, or what is the period of gap between the monitoring that is done? Is it once every 3 months? Is it done monthly instead of daily? Is there a period over which, and is there any specific time that it does it?
That I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that's more or less within our remit, as it were. I don't think that's predetermined by DEFRA.
Thank you, Ian, for answering those questions. I think it's worth saying that I imagine the similar will apply to Winnersh.
Yeah. And say there were 2 Winnersh members on there, 2 Twyford members, and we've noted what Ian has said.
Yeah. I think the main point to emphasise is that this is something that we really don't have any choice over. We have to revoke these, because if we don't, they'll be revoked for us. But we do have some reassurance, and glad Lindsay asked his questions, and reassurance there will be periodic monitoring to ensure that there isn't any return to a position where we have cause for concern.
Yes, I would say it has been through our legal department, and they have basically underwritten this report.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Okay, so this is something we really have very little choice.
I would have to say I will have to reluctantly support this, because I think this is something that, in the case of Twyford, there are people living at the crossroads, and particularly in High Street, where the level of particulates and nitrogen dioxide was the highest. And I want to make sure, and have it recorded here, that we as the council will do everything, which is why I asked about the monitoring, is done to ensure that if there is any rise in figure as a result, as I mentioned, is definitely an increase in traffic. Again, that if we see a rise, then we ask for communicate with DEFRA to say, look, we think this needs to be.
I think Ian's given you that assurance, and I'm glad you wanted it underlined, but we have that assurance, and I think there will be periodic monitoring, and if it picks up anything, we are in the position to be able to apply for this to be redesignated, and that's what we'll do. But thank you very much. So those in favour of the recommendations on pages 101 to 2, please show. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ian. And then we come to the final item on our agenda, item 90. This is the annual health and safety report, 2022-23. And this starts on page 149 of your agenda. And it's Rachel who's going to present this.
Thank you very much. So this is a report that we get every year so that we can all have assurance that this critical area is being managed correctly. The corporate health and safety team has moved into HR, so this report is with me for the first time. And I'm pleased to see this outlines a number of ways that the borough health and safety experts are working with the HR business partners on the council to protect the health and wellbeing of council staff. And it shows the synergies between these two disciplines. We have a very well established health and safety system at Wokingham Borough Council, and the role of the corporate health and safety team hasn't changed as a result of the move. The council's approach focuses on the identification and management of risk at the earliest possible opportunity to stop incidents from happening. The council encourages all staff to flag up any concerns or near misses that they have and any incidents which occur, no matter how small. There's huge power in investigating near misses so that we can understand the root causes and fix them to prevent future incidents. The results of this approach are very impressive. It's a contributor to the fact that we've gone from a recent peak of 703 reported incidents in 2019 to 2020 to 296 in 2022 to 2023. So that's less than half. It's worth noting that another contributor to this is an increase in the numbers of staff who work from home, where this arrangement is appropriate. The HR team are currently working on a modern workforce strategy, which will provide a robust structure for Wokingham Borough Council's working arrangements based around resident needs and providing staff with flexibility where this is appropriate. It's good to see evidence that this approach can boost employee wellbeing in this way, and that we're certainly not complacent because a risk assessment will be undertaken in the current year to look at the challenges of hybrid working. It's a bit of a cliche to put it this way, but it's still absolutely true that, of course, 296 incidents in the year is still 296 incidents too many. The team are concerned that there's been a decrease in the near miss reporting, which is so important for preventing future accidents. And the team will be addressing this in communications, including induction of new staff. There's also considerable effort in protecting employees from musculoskeletal problems and from stress. And from personal experience, workplace assessments are so quick, they're so simple, and they're an incredible way of saving yourself a lot of pain. And I'd really encourage all of us here tonight to do them regularly. They are one of the quickest ways that you can maintain your well-being. There were 2 serious incident investigations necessary, unfortunately. The lessons for these investigations have been identified and they're being implemented. I checked with the staff what the pattern of these most serious incidents are, and it is fairly static. And we tend to have a couple of these, unfortunately, every year. I want to close by mentioning 2 major initiatives planned for this year, which will have a positive effect on the health and safety of our residents. There's the Housing Compliance Health Check and the Health and Safety Assurance Programme for schools. Those are big, but both large pieces of work which will boost the wellbeing of hundreds of people in the borough, including many of our children. So this report is an excellent summary of the health and safety action that we take to protect Wokingham Borough Council residents and staff, and I'm very pleased to recommend it to the executive tonight.
Thank you very much, Rachel. You made some very, very important points there. And obviously, we can't talk about individual cases, but there is something I wanted to raise. It's on page 157, and this relates to the verbal abuse against staff, council employees, and there's been an increase in the last 3 years. Which is very regrettable. Do we have any sense of why there's been an increase? And perhaps more importantly, do we have any idea of how we're going to try and tackle this problem?
Yes, so I mean, a lot of our staff, of course, work in areas where there are some very difficult and very emotive issues at play. And a lot of these incidents of verbal abuse, they happen within areas such as school admissions, for example, fines, housing provision. It's really important that we make it a priority to protect the staff in these frontline roles. And there's quite a lot of effort is put into, for example, training in personal safety and in risk management for these staff. I think tackling this issue starts with, very much like with the near misses, it starts with understanding the problem. And a number of years ago, the council identified that there seemed to be an underreporting of incidents. So there's been quite a lot of effort in the last few years to encourage staff to report incidents, particularly the most serious incidents, so that we can understand why they're happening and put steps in place to protect those staff. It is something that I've been discussing with the AD of Corporate Services, and we will be continuing to monitor this in the future to make sure that we're doing all that we can to protect the staff in these really critical frontline roles.
Thank you, Rachel. So some of the increase may in fact simply be because there's now a greater willingness to report that such incidents are occurring. But even so, it's clearly deeply regrettable that any council employees are subject to verbal abuse. And I think we all should try and bear in mind that council employees they're here doing their very best to serve the public. And I hope members of the public who interact with them recognise that.
Absolutely.
And actually treat them with respect and recognise that they are trying to help. Okay, thank you very much. If there aren't any other comments that anyone wishes to make, can we go to a vote on approving the recommendations? Well, it's a single recommendation that we note this performance and the priorities in the report. Okay, those in favour, please share. Thank you very much. That's carried unanimously, and that brings the meeting to a close. What seems only a blink of an eye since we started. So thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions this evening. Thank you to members of the public who came along. It may not have seemed like a blink of the eye to you. It might have seemed rather longer than that, but thank you very much.